Stannis Baratheon is in a really strange place going into the Winds of Winter, and I don't just mean the North. He's very much a vestige of a bygone era of the story. A Clash of Kings, a Storm of Swords, War of the Five Kings type era, specifically given that he's the only surviving king left from that war. You would think that would lead to him winning the war, but he views this conflict as ever ongoing. Where we leave off in A Dance with Dragons, he's only a few days' ride from Winterfell, where he hopes to lay siege and defeat the Boltons, claiming the North for his cause. It's interesting to look at what exactly might be next for him in the Winds of Winter. At least if I think back to my initial read of the books as of 2016, I assumed that Stannis was a dead man and not long for this world, given both his death in the show towards the end of Season 5 and the fact that Stannis doesn't really seem to have much of a place going forward in the story. Winterfell will likely be claimed by one of the Starks or another, Sansa or Rickon or Jon Snow or someone else, and Stannis may be cast aside or killed in battle or something similar to what had happened on HBO. With that said, there are a number of indications as to Stannis' fate in the future of the series, all of which seem to point towards a much larger role than we'd seen in the adaptation. Today, I'm going to discuss what might happen to Stannis in the Winds of Winter, going up beyond the immediate predicament at the Battle of Ice that he's in, and looking forward to his larger role in the remaining portion of the narrative. The main point of evidence I have towards Stannis being a bigger portion of the Winds of Winter than I thought is the Theon sample chapter. This was released, I guess, a decade or so ago now, and it is essentially a Stannis perspective chapter, despite the fact that the one true king has never been a viewpoint character. Theon is chained to his wall as a prisoner, and while we do get some insights from being in Theon's head, and it is great to be back there after his arc and dance, it is fascinating because we really get to see insight into Stannis like we really haven't had in, I'd say, a couple books' time. I think the most comparable things would be like the Crescent prologue in Clash of Kings, or the Captain of the Guards in A Feast for Crows, in terms of this is a chapter where we are deliberately getting a very close look at a ruler to figure out what is going on inside their heads without actually being inside their heads, because that would give up too many secrets. I think the secrets that would be given up in this case would likely be the Night Lamp, which is a big theory by the user Can't Use. I have a video on his theory elsewhere on this channel, but I do think there are a number of other elements in this chapter that will come into play later on in Stannis' story. While the majority of Theon's sample chapter in the Winds of Winter is dedicated to setting up the imminent Battle of Ice, I think there are two key details therein that lay out Stannis' trajectory in the future of the wider narrative. The first of these is the journey of Sir Justin Massey. Sir Justin is being sent with the banker Tycho Nestoris back to Braavos to retrieve Stannis' loan from the Iron Bank. Justin Massey is an interesting choice for this job. Yes, he's served Stannis loyally for the entire duration of the war up until this point, but Justin Massey doesn't have a ton left at this point in the tank. He's lost all of his lands for fighting for Stannis, the Lannisters have seized them, and he seems very focused on his own station and his own place in the world. Throughout getting to know him in A Dance with Dragons, he ends up hitting on most female characters he encounters, most notably Val, and he hopes that Stannis will give him Winterfell along with Val's hand if he serves him ably enough, and then later on Asha, in hopes that Asha would be able to crown herself Queen of the Iron Islands and have Justin at her side and essentially ruling through her. Justin has been loyal up until this point, but he's been sent overseas by Stannis with a mission to hire sellswords to Stannis' cause to aid in furthering this claim on the throne. He is told to hire these sellswords and bring them back no matter what, regardless of whether or not Stannis' cause has succeeded in the North. Specifically, he says, "You may hear that I am dead. It may even be true." And essentially he goes on from there saying it doesn't matter, you will place Shireen on the Iron Throne or die in the attempt. That is very much a setup bomb that I will get to, and I will talk about what exactly I think is being implied there on two different fronts, but there is one other element of this chapter that I think is pretty notable in terms of what is being set up, that being the ravens in this tower. Theon and Stannis are the only characters, human characters, who remain inside this small chamber for the entirety of this chapter, but there are two ravens left there, and they seem to have a mind of their own. They're repeating Theon's name, they're repeating very relevant parts of the conversation, and seemingly steering it in certain directions, as though we've seen other ravens do that in the series at other points, most notably Mormont's raven with Jon's election to Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. It seems as though these two ravens are being controlled either both by Bran or one by Bloodraven, one by Bran. He obviously has a very concrete connection to Theon, but these ravens are influencing the course of Stannis' dealings. We see them be influenced in how he's going to execute Theon in assumedly the next chapter we see him in. So overall, there's some magic of the old gods going on that is focusing, if not on Stannis, at least around Stannis. Also, if you're a true supporter of the one true king, you'll definitely subscribe. In all seriousness, it's free and it does really help the channel, as does liking the video and commenting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the video. Back to it. As previously mentioned, I'm not going to go too deep in the paint on the Battle of Ice here. I've already talked about it in my Night Lamp video, which I'll link in the cards. I highly suggest you watch that video either now and then come back to this one, or after this one. Regardless of that, there is one important element of the Battle of Ice that I didn't touch on a ton there. That is the thought of sacrifice in the midst of the battle. We saw the burning of Mance Rayder, who turned out to be Rattleshirt, and how that increased the light emanated from Lightbringer, Stannis' magical sword, earlier on in A Dance with Dragons. It seems likely that was set up and foreshadowing for another execution, and potentially another false execution. Theon Greyjoy is set to be killed by Stannis Baratheon for the numerous crimes he's committed in the North, and it's unlikely that he's actually going to end up killing Theon for that, because Theon is a very valuable hostage. Instead, people have speculated that he might kill Arnulf Karstark instead. Theon looks like an old man, Arnulf is an old man, and has recently betrayed Stannis, and we've seen how bright Lightbringer can glow, even from a false execution before it. I personally believe that Stannis did know that he was killing Rattleshirt instead of Mance, so I think that continuing this theme of Stannis doing false executions and powering up Lightbringer that way, specifically if that light were to either blind the Freys and Manderleys or attract them to the island to cause them to fall through the ice, I think either way it would make sense for his larger plan in the Battle of Ice. The most important element of the Battle of Ice going forward is going to be Stannis' death. Not Stannis actually dying, but Stannis faking his own death for the sake of his enemies. Essentially, the thought is going to be that the Manderley men, who are on Davos' side by way of Davos and his quest to get Rickon, whether or not that's successful, we don't yet know, because we haven't had a Davos chapter. I do probably think it was successful. But regardless, I think the Manderleys are going to bring Lightbringer back to Winterfell and show it off and say, oh, we killed Stannis, it's okay, we don't really need to worry about him anymore, only to have Stannis sneak into the castle and potentially steal it from the Boltons. This could involve a number of things. This could involve some sort of decoy attack on the Dreadfort as well to draw them out. There are a number of ways in which this could play out, but overall, the main focus of this video is looking beyond the immediate conflict with the Bolton and towards the larger story and Stannis' role therein. All of my thoughts on how Stannis' conflict with the Boltons will play out are largely in line with the manifesto published by Can't Use, which for the most part I agree with. I think after taking Winterfell, Stannis is in quite the tough predicament. I think that the Battle of Ice, his plan is going to work. The Night Lamp is going to be successful, but I imagine a fair amount of his troops will be decimated in the process. We have to remember the Asha fragment, where she sees forces rushing together like something. That makes me think that it won't be just the Freys and the Boltons who are on the ice at the time it cracks. I think that Stannis' forces, once they claim Winterfell, are going to be just about depleted. And additionally, this rumor of him dying could do some damage politically, insofar as if people think he's dead, like, they're not going to take his cause seriously. Additionally, there is the likelihood that there could be another Stark coming back. The Manderleys specifically want Rickon returned. I could see them naming him king in the north instead of his brother Robb, just to continue this plight for northern independence, which they have been very fervent supporters of in the past, and they did think very much got cut down in its prime by the Freys and by the Boltons at the Red Wedding, as we heard during Wyman's great speech in Davos' 4th chapter of A Dance with Dragons. I think that Stannis won't be killed in Winterfell, but I think that he will fall into pretty significant political disfavor. Not even necessarily disfavor, but more that his cause is very much not the most pressing thing going on right now, and the North is going to seek its own independence rather than prop up this other Baratheon king who would just rule over their potential Stark, who is the one they really want. I will also say that Stark could also be Sansa, who is ruling over Rickon in her stead, or it could be Jon legitimized by Robb's will. Unclear on which. If Stannis is left without an army, or at least without a sizable army, and without favor in the north, what might he do? Where might he go? My main thought is he might finally turn his gaze again northward. I've seen a number of people pitch this suggestion that Stannis will either be the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, the 999th or the 1000th, or the next Night's King. I don't know if either of these are necessarily accurate. To tackle the second one first, I think that Stannis is already a pretty deliberate parallel to the Night King, just kind of inverted. I think that his story with Melisandre very much inverts that tale. The Night's King was someone who essentially was involved with this woman whose hair was as white as snow and was said to be cold and have these glowing blue eyes. Melisandre is the opposite. She's warm. She is fire incarnate. And this essentially leads to both individuals' moral degradation to the point that they seemingly, quote unquote, need to be stopped because of this magic. I think that Stannis, in being that parallel already, has kind of fulfilled it. I don't think that he's going to end up joining the others or anything like that. I think that people tend to look into one specific prophecy to justify that idea. Stannis Baratheon is introduced to the reader in A Clash of Kings. In that same book, Daenerys has a series of visions at the House of the Undying. To quote from one of her chapters, "Glowing like sunset, a red sword was raised in the hand of a blue-eyed king who cast no shadow." There is also more talking about false dragons and a stone dragon in that same paragraph, but the main crux of that thought is Stannis Baratheon is this blue-eyed king who casts no shadow with a burning sword. It matches the image of him with Lightbringer. He has blue eyes, and casting no shadow is quite interesting. Some people believe that Stannis having blue eyes and casting no shadow could be some reference to him being an other in this vision of him as the Night's King, but I think that they might be reading into it a tad too much. My main thought is the not having a shadow in this vision references the shadow baby that Melisandre spawned in order to kill his brother Renly, not necessarily that Stannis is an undead, a vampire who doesn't have a shadow or something like that. Stannis Baratheon is going to burn his daughter in the Winds of Winter, at least if Martin hasn't changed his mind about it. We know that a note to the showrunners of Season 5 of Game of Thrones was that he was going to do this in the book, that specifically Stannis was going to burn Shireen. This could be what wakes the Stone Dragon. This could awaken a grayscale plague in the north, which I do think seems likely given Val's comments towards the end of Dance. But overall, it's unclear what exactly the purpose of burning Shireen might be. I think that Stannis' story is going to tie towards one major goal, and it's a goal that he outlines in A Storm of Swords. He believes the true enemy is north of the Wall. I think that Shireen is going to be burned in order to somehow stop the White Walkers. Otherwise, I think that her death might just be kind of in vain, and I feel like Martin is someone who does like to have realistic characters and things happen with a touch of realism, but I think that having a little girl be sacrificed by her father for effectively no reason, as was the case in the show, not only wouldn't really make sense with his overall narratives, but would just be super duper underwhelming. I mean, we saw how that played out, and it was just kind of awful all around. I believe that Stannis' fate is tied to a story that he has paralleled and twisted since his first introduction in A Clash of Kings. Specifically, I believe that Stannis and Renly Baratheon are sort of a twist and inversion on Cain and Abel, this old Bible story. I'm not particularly religious, I don't claim to know this story better than most, but at least in my understanding, Adam and Eve were the first people and they had two children. They had Cain and Abel in order of birth. Abel was given the animals and essentially was tending to them, and Cain was given the fields. Both sacrificed a part of their work, and Abel was favored more than Cain by God. Cain got jealous and ended up killing Abel, and then was cursed to wander to the ends of the earth. That's the Cliff Notes version. But regardless of that, I think it's a very clear parallel to Stannis and Renly. In both instances, there are two brothers, a younger and an older. The younger is favored by some sort of higher power. In the story, it's God. In Ice and Fire, it could be the king, with Robert giving Renly Storm's End instead of Stannis, who gets Dragonstone. And then after this individual is killed, after the younger brother is slain due to the older brother's perceived jealousy, though in Stannis' case, it's kind of perceived to be jealousy by the realm, whereas there is the fact that he very much had a better claim, and Renly was just doing this all out of vanity. And then after that, the individual is sort of cast aside by the higher power, in this instance, no longer the king, but the realm as a whole, and forced to wander to the ends of the earth. What do we see Stannis do in A Storm of Swords? He wanders to the ends of the earth, where he goes to fight the wildlings and the others at the Wall. Stannis' story is largely concerned with destiny and duty, not what one wants, but rather what they must do. I believe what Stannis must do is face down the great enemy in the north, the others, and I believe he will have assistance in so doing. I think that we know that Justin Massey and TheMico are going to be departing from Eastwatch to Braavos in order to bring forces back for Stannis. I think that by the time that Justin and TheMico return, Stannis will also be at the Wall, potentially at Eastwatch, more likely at the Night Fort or Castle Black, and I think that his forces will go to him there instead of pursuing his cause in the south. This will be a large portion of how the fight for the Dawn is going to end up going in the books, insofar as there really aren't many forces left unscathed in the north as of the end of A Dance with Dragons. I think that Stannis having Justin Massey return with these forces will be a large degree of why the White Walkers will be repelled in the end, rather than Arya with the dagger. Side note, though, I think that a big portion as to how Arya could return to Westeros could be via Justin Massey, as he will be going to Braavos, where she is, and he is looking for glory and potentially claim on Winterfell, which getting Arya back to the north could, if not give him a claim on Winterfell, could put him in the debt of the ruling family of Winterfell. So am I saying that Stannis is going to die fighting the others? Is he going to be the epilogue viewpoint in the Winds of Winter where he'll eventually succumb to this struggle and the others will come further southward? I do think the others are going to come further southward, but I've recently warmed to the interpretation that Stannis Baratheon might yet survive the entirety of the series. And part of that is rooted in that story I discussed earlier. While Cain was kind of cursed to wander the earth, he is also the individual from which humanity is supposedly descended. My thought is that after Stannis has wandered the earth, he might actually be the Baratheon to inherit Storm's End and continue that line after the Winds of Winter, after Dream of Spring, and after the series as a whole. Martin has gone on record as discussing characters having different fates from the show to the books on a number of different occasions, and we do know that at least once, as of 2022, he had recently thought of a perfect ending for a character that was very different from what happened in the show. I believe that character might be Stannis, and I think that ending could be him surviving against all odds, as many individuals right now, myself for a long time included, thought that Stannis was a doomed man going into the Winds of Winter. Nowadays, I think he might have some hope of survival. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it, and it does really help grow the channel, and all of it is free. And I talk a lot about A Song of Ice and Fire, A House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones, soon Dunk and Egg, which will be fun. And I'd really like it if you stayed tuned so I could share all of my other thoughts with you. This was going to be a Winter's Coming initially, but it kind of went off the rails and got more theory-y than I like to do with those, insofar as I like to provide a range of options rather than just one vision, as I did here. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll be back with many more videos in the near future. So like, subscribe. Thank you. Goodbye.